I designed a custom magic card every day for a month, and this is what I learned. So you started out with this idea of making a Splatoon-inspired series of cards. Make a video every day, make a card every day, see what happens. I wanted to start it pretty simple, so I was avoiding legends off the bat, but I really like sets, and by doing 30 days of cards, I can explore some different design concepts. As such, I figured I could lay the groundwork by establishing what the colored archetypes should look like in this potential universes beyond Splatoon theoretical set. So for the first 5 days, I made mono-colored cards that would be the embodiment of whatever archetype they were supposed to be. With this, I showed that blue cares about activated abilities. I introduced a new keyword called fresh, which is actually more like a special condition. It's more like goaded from a mechanical sense. This allows something to tap on the turn it enters, even though it can't attack on the turn it enters. Something I think is very, very blue, and yet we don't really see that often. Next is red, and I just wanted a simple creature that could get in some hits, get in some damage, and of course had an activated ability to take advantage of the fresh condition that blue cards might give them. This set the basis for what the blue-red archetype would eventually become throughout the series. For green, we have another simple creature, just a trampling creature that when it successfully does combat damage, creates a token. These tokens I planned on being very important to green's archetype, but as the month went on, I really didn't return to this very often. It was something that I thought would work, but since I was just designing this straight ahead, it didn't really come up again. I still think that if you did develop an entire 300, 400 card set, you would see this mechanic be recurred. It's intended to be a token that we have multiple cards making, not exclusive to this one card. The black card showed us that black is going to be the main color that represents Salmonids and Grizzco, and the overlap between those things are, of course, golden eggs. If you know the series, you know that golden eggs are kind of an important thing. Not only are they visibly golden, and so they seem like they'd be valuable, they produce power and stuff, which actually makes them pretty perfect for representing treasure tokens in our set. As such, I wanted black to have a lot of treasure synergy and fish synergy, and just normal treasure tokens can represent that without needing to create an entirely new custom token. For white, I wanted a card that cared about respawning into the game. In Splatoon, it's a game and you respawn, which you wouldn't normally think lines up with a game that's not supposed to have those sorts of mechanics. It's just an abstraction, but in Splatoon, it's not an abstraction, it's a real thing. For a long time, I thought I was gonna have this recurring thing about the number 4. There's 4 players on a team in Splatoon, and so having 4 be this magic number is something that comes up now and then throughout the set, but it didn't really have a clear, firm archetype. Here we're seeing it as the top cap of how much this spell can do, as opposed to really being something that you need to be shooting for. It's just kind of a cute number, more than it's an actually well thought out theme. I mean, while I did think about each card extensively, the entire synergy throughout every card in the set is not the most thought out it could be. It's a straight ahead process. I didn't go back and change any. Although I'm sure that if you were going to develop this into a full set, you would. This is the first draft for all 30 cards. If you were making a real set, you would then tinker with all of them until they were balanced as much as you'd like for an actual set. The next 5 days I used to explore the 2-color combinations. I figured the set wouldn't feature heavy usage of all 10 2-color combinations and instead choose 5. Something like Strixhaven did. In fact, those are the same 2-color combinations that I went with for the series. We have blue-red, caring about activated abilities, being fresh so you can activate those abilities, getting in, getting quick, being pretty aggro, that kind of thing. We have blue-green, caring about getting in damage, a reward for having trample. In this case, it's a very blue reward of getting more card draw. You see a lot of this trample and card draw synergy throughout the series. Green and black was intended to be what I used to represent Salmonids specifically. In Splatoon, Salmonids are the PvE faction. They're the ones that you team up to fight against as opposed to fighting each other in PvP. That said, they're not actually really that evil, and I kind of like that. Black is so often the evil color, and I think Salmonids do a great job at representing the kind of black that's just a different way of thinking and acting without actually being morally wrong. They're just an opposition that butts heads with the rest of the game world. Black-white, on the other hand, is about Salmonids from the perspective of exploiting them. It's the P side of the PvE. It's Mr. Grizz telling you to go kill all of them so that you can steal their eggs and make money. It's a big focus on the treasure power that they are worth, that the salmonids represent, and the acquisition of it. Here is where I actually established the idea of a recurring token that is a 1/1 fish token that drops a treasure when it dies. This might have been the biggest misstep of the entire set, because I didn't go back and change this, and I have a ton of other cards that use this same token. The thing is, that's a really powerful token, and figuring out how to allow your cards to create that token without the card as a whole being broken, with it being still balanced, was really difficult. I don't know if it's actually a bad thing. It felt really good to create these cards that felt really strong, and I had to find a way to power down in other ways. That actually felt really good to try and figure out, but probably I would do it a bit differently if I did it again. I'm not sure. Obviously, not every token in a set needs to be constantly recurring, but I really like those tokens. Having a token that's not just on a one-off card, not different for every card in the set, but actually used again and again and again, feels really good. It makes a set feel very cohesive. It's the mercenary tokens in Thunder Junction or the Brat tokens in Wilds of Eldraine. They give it a certain flavor and it feels really nice. It's so ingrained in that white-black archetype to me now after finishing the whole thing that I don't really want to change it, but yeah, I do wonder if there was a better way. Red-white is our last two-color pair, and it is supposed to represent the story mode, which is kind of a weird thing to say. If Magic is all of your creatures working together to beat the other team, that's very Splatoon. But story mode is you, the protagonist, working alone to save the world. Instead, the other creatures don't fight. They just help you, they buff you, they make you stronger, they cheer you on. And that's what I wanted to have out of red-white. I wanted it to be sort of an exalted style effect, where you want your creatures attacking alone, even though you want a wide board supporting that singular creature. It's not Voltron in the form of one creature wears a ton of equipment and kills face. It's Voltron in that a bunch of creatures support one creature, and then it kills face. I don't know if I really succeeded in that, but the thing about this month is that everything's a little underdeveloped. 30 cards is really few when you're trying to support 5 different archetypes. Each one just doesn't get to have that many cards exploring its themes. So I really like the idea of the red-white archetype in this set, and I'm really excited for what someone could do if you developed the entire 300, 400 cards. The next set of 5, I decided to hit the same two-color pairs again. I wanted to re-establish them and reaffirm them and have them feel like they really worked in the world, as opposed to being one-offs. One of my other goals was to establish that all the cards had a so-and-so's something something. And while I missed it here and there, that really felt like a good way of bringing in these legendary characters without literally making a card about that legendary character, which felt really good to me personally. The next set of 5 was all monocolored again. I really felt like at this point I had way too many multicolored cards. There really aren't that many multicolored cards in the history of Magic when you really think about it. Individual monocolored cards need to be able to fit into those two-color archetypes, not have two-color cards be the entire archetype. So the goal here was to have 5 commons, specifically commons, that could fit into those archetypes while being monocolored. This was a big challenge because I wanted to make sure all the cards were relatively low powered. I wanted to make sure they were cards that I really thought would make sense to come up more often in a draft. It's really easy to think about rarity as a power level, and it is a little bit, but not really. What it is it's about when you're drafting, should you see multiple copies of this card? A card that's not that powerful might still be really oppressive in big numbers, especially when it's in draft and not constructed where you can build around it. So these are the things I had to think about when I was building this set of 5 cards. Next, we had the set of cards 20 to 25, and these I wanted to all be the off two-color pairs. Even though I think the set should only be about 5 two-color pairs, I really wanted to have these one-off, weird, iconic cards that didn't really fit with the rest of the set to still be represented. I thought that the other two-color pairs should be present in the set, even if they're not prevalent in the set. This gave me an opportunity to represent characters that weren't necessarily part of any of the factions and archetypes that we've shown so far, and instead are kind of on their own doing their own thing. I started with DJ Octavio, and that might seem weird, like he's the leader of an army, the army that represents the opposition of the majority of the story mode in the games, yet I just don't really think that that's super interesting. I didn't want to represent Octarian soldiers throughout the series, and instead, I think of him as kind of this weird anomaly. He's kind of just the boss, and his underlings are not that interesting. Maybe I'm wrong, I haven't played a lot of 1 and 2, I mostly know 3, in which he isn't the villain, so that might be biased talking. For these last 5 color pairs, I wanted to make sure that the cards were these big splashy effects. So for DJ Octavio, I didn't just think what would be a good card that represents the character, but what would make a good commander? Because that's kind of the expected home for a card like this that doesn't actually fit into an archetype directly. The rest of the pairs followed a very similar mentality. If they were legends, they had to make sense as commanders. All that said, some of them were just iconic things that I really wanted to represent in this series. And again, we only have 30 days. Sometimes they're just a one-off. While I was doing the entire series literally daily, I would design the card and make the video the day prior and put it out in the morning. During that last 5 days of 2 colors, I'd already started thinking about what the final 5 would be. I didn't even really have a lot of plans, but if an idea came to me, I would write it down ahead of time and revisit it on that day. For the final 5, I knew pretty well ahead of time that I wanted to hit the most iconic characters of the series. I'd been avoiding legends the entire month, and so in the last 5 days, I wanted to try and hit as many as I could. As such, I wanted to represent the bands of the game. Music is so important to Splatoon. It's kind of amazing how important it is, even though the game isn't directly about music. It's not a rhythm game, it's about shooting people with ink. Despite this, basically every main character is a musician. How does that line up? I don't really know. I don't think there's anything magical about music in the series. It just is, and that's cool. So I went through each of the bands that feature these main characters to represent all together on one card. We've got the Squid Sisters, we've got Off the Hook, and we've got Deep Cut, showing each of the main bands across the 3 main titles. It was actually incredibly hard to make these cards. I've been going pretty well across the month, not facing a lot of burnout. I was kind of impressed, honestly. But these last 5 days, they didn't break me. They didn't, but oh, they got close. Legends are just so much more complicated most of the time. And while I try to keep things as simple as I can because it's so easy to go complicated when you could go simple, these cards were all team-up cards. Team-up cards are some of the most complicated cards in the entire game. And while I was able to keep the Squid Sisters and Off the Hook relatively simple, Deep Cut was 3 different characters on one card. It was a lot. For the next day, I wasn't sure if I wanted to show Mr. Grizz himself as a black-white card, or if I wanted to show one more, maybe more fringe pet character, DJ Deadfish. Deadfish was featured a little bit in Splatoon 2's expansion, but didn't really become a real character with actual dialogue and a 3D model until Splatoon 3's expansion, making them a pretty recent character, so kind of an odd choice to feature on one of these cards. Even though Deadfish's inclusion is more recent than Grizz's, Grizz's felt more impactful. We see Deadfish at the beginning of the expansion, who helped us out throughout it, as opposed to Mr. Grizz's involvement in the main story of Splatoon 3, which is a lot more mysterious, and I'll let you discover that on your own. So ultimately, I decided to go with Deadfish instead. And this whole time I've been saying Deadfish, as that's their stage name, but they do have an actual name, it's Oct. But I've been saying Deadfish instead because these last few days have been about bands, and so I wanted to show the musician persona of Oct, not really Oct themselves. All of this, however, was leading up to the final 30th card, Calamari Incantation. Not a creature in the world, or a weapon to be used, or a band, a song. And there are so many songs in the game. Like I said, music is so important to Splatoon, but this one needs to be its own card. It is so incredibly iconic, and I just had to make it its own spell. Actually figuring out what this spell should do, though, was so hard. Maybe it was burnout after 30 days, I don't know, but I could not. Well, I mean, that's an exaggeration. I did make the card. But you want your cards to be simple. You do. But I worry it's too simple. I don't know. I do like what it does. It gets people moving. They're back up. They're on their feet. They're ready to keep going. They are hyped to fight. And that's really what it should do. It's not really magic, right? It's music. So what did I learn? 30 is a lot, but also none at all. Doing a new card every day for 30 days is so many. I don't know what the actual team at WotC making cards goes through to make a new set, but just try to churn out a card every day, not even playtesting them. I haven't played a single one of these cards. I just go, yeah, that sounds right. Obviously, I do a lot of thinking about it, but these aren't playtested. These are the barest, most draft version of a card. And it still was so draining. I feel like I need to have some point in all of this. I started doing this just on a whim. It was something that somebody suggested to me and I went, that's a cool idea, let's do that. I haven't done a daily series in a while. And so I did it. I didn't do this with some goal in mind. I didn't do this to make this video even. I came up with the idea of making a video about it halfway through the month when I realized, oh yeah, of course I should talk about it. And so I don't really have a lot to say. It was fun. It was cool. It was exhausting. Honestly, I'm really glad it's over, but I'm also really glad I did it. All in all, doing month-long projects is hard. Like, it might not seem like much to make a card and make some art, and it's not even good art, but like, I didn't even talk about how I drew a picture for all these cards. Have a good night, everyone. I have been Darcy Bits. I like to make custom cards. I hope you'll consider subscribing so you can see the next custom thing I do. Expect a new video next week. I don't know what it's gonna be yet. Bye!